Hello again, Dan Alasso with Making History. And today I want to return to my Obsidian Graph again. And I want to talk specifically about filling in empty nodes. One of the things that bugs me a bit when I'm watching my Obsidian Graph build in that animation is the number of purple dots, which represent empty nodes or nodes that I haven't filled in with information yet. They generally appear around topics that I have dug into a bit because I tend to double bracket items that I find interesting in books that I read when I'm taking notes or in other notes that I make, so that I can return to these topics later and see how they connect to others. I have considered just eliminating these empty nodes by choosing the existing files only option in the graph filters. Sometimes I think that's a very useful way for me to look at my information. However, if I did this regularly, and if I made that my main view, I would miss some of the connections between the notes that I've spent a lot of time and effort filling already because they would no longer connect to other notes through these empty nodes. Now, I suppose there is something to be said for the connections that I make from one fully formed, or at least substantially formed note to another one. But given the evolving, kind of constant work in progress nature of my vault right now, I think that I would be missing a lot if I restricted my view to just those connections. There are many purple nodes, of course, that are going to be just one-offs. They may be interesting details of a particular reading or topic, but without any larger importance for me, at least at the moment. And these usually live in a tight cluster around the note that contains them, and most of them can probably be fairly readily ignored. However, there are a lot of purple nodes that have been pulled away from their source notes because they appear in more than one. These may represent topics that I find interesting in a variety of different contexts, or an idea that I always highlight when I find it in a text. Obviously, the number of times that I've highlighted a term by putting double brackets around it when I've read in Kindle or Hypothesis or wherever, the more significant it may be to my overall thinking. So I can use these purple nodes with lots of arrows pointing to them as indications of my interest. Some of them may be general topics like economic history that I should probably take a moment to define. I can zoom into my graph and just begin looking at purple nodes with multiple connections. And these, as I said, will be the interesting ones that I've mentioned in more than one note. Some of them I may want to fill in immediately. Others I may pass by and return to later. Either way, over time, I will probably get to them all. Once I've made an actual note for a topic, even if it's relatively sparse at first, I can return to it later, and I can use the linked and the unlinked mentions pane on the right-hand margin of the Obsidian Graph to look at that new note and better understand its connections, and then to add more of the unlinked mentions into the graph. This is crucial because oftentimes an idea or a name, something like Woodrow Wilson, will come up in a quoted text or in my own writing, but I will not have double bracketed it. Now, not every one of these types of mentions ought to be linked, in my opinion, but it is valuable to review the unlinked mentions from time to time and find the ones that should be tied in. Some of the basic information in a note that I'm beginning to fill in can obviously easily be found in places like Wikipedia. Some will come off the top of my head. Some will be my own perspective or commentary or spin on the topic that I'm filling in. The point is not so much that I'm adding new information here, because clearly in some cases I'm not really, as that I'm enabling these connections. One of the notes I filled in while I was recording this was Dr. Charles Knowlton. He's not somebody that I had to look up. In fact, I can probably reasonably claim to be the foremost authority on this 19th century freethinker. But it's important to me to have a note in the vault for him. As soon as I make it, there are 10 linked and 21 unlinked mentions for me to check into. I can also manually add into the text as I'm writing it names like Robert Dale Owen and Frances Wright. one of whom already has a fairly extensive node, and the other still has an empty node. And this will allow me to follow their link trails as well. There are 6 linked mentions already to Owen. Do they all lead to notes that are already linked to Knowlton? In order to find out and to follow these trails to new discoveries, I need to keep filling in these connecting empty nodes. So I'll probably report more on this and on some of the discoveries that I make while I'm doing this, but I hope people found that a little bit interesting. Thanks very much for watching. I will see you again